Johnny is the CEO of WOMHub, which is based in South Africa. And she's one of the latest grantees in the Climate Gender Equity Fund, which is an initiative kicked off by USAID and Amazon, who are both here today, with additional funders including Beast Foundation and Skoll, UPS Foundation, and Reckitt, to support women entrepreneurs working at the intersection of climate and gender. And so, and Johnny, as the CEO of WOMHub, works not just in that area of climate, but across women's entrepreneurship and women's empowerment. And a quick side note on Johnny, I saw this women's empowerment in action this week when she told her 16-year-old daughter to just get in the Uber by herself and crisscross San Francisco because she couldn't join and get back to the hotel on your own. You'll be fine. And so also a credit to her as a mom, because her daughter jumped in the car and took off and escaped the event that we were having the other night. So so we'll hear from Johnny in a minute. Also up here with me is Pyle Pothik, who's a senior program officer at the Visa Foundation. Pyle leads their work on gender and diverse businesses around the world. Not only working again at the intersection of gender and climate, but really on any problem that you might need to tackle, including a multi-stakeholder coalition trying to attack youth homelessness here in the Bay Area. And so if you ever need someone, I've known Pyle for many years, to pull together people to solve a problem, Pyle is who you want to call. Just be ready, because as I've heard from friends and relatives of her, whether it's backpacking Havasu pie or organizing a friend's wedding, you better come correct if you're going to work with Pyle, because she is going to put you to work right away. So pleasure to talk to both of them. And again, we're going to have some time for Q&A in a bit. But one of the things that was really delightful when we had our prep call was our moderators here at SOCAP said they wanted to invite healthy controversy. Have you heard that this week yet as well? Yeah. So we decided, all right, as the last panel of the week, we are going to just start with that. We're not going to end with it. We're going to start with that. And we're hoping you can invite some healthy controversy in your questions as well. So let's move past the platitudes and truisms and glitz and glam and try to get after it. So the first question is sparked by, we 2X Global recently had our annual members meeting, our global summit in Nairobi. And one of the other CGEF recipients, Climate Gender Equity Fund recipients, from Mchala in Kenya, said that a few years ago, somebody approached her about potentially funding her work and asked her, well, how many climate entrepreneurs can you deliver? And she of course said, I mean, she didn't say what she was thinking, but what she was thinking was, are you ridiculous? Like, what does that mean? No one identifies themselves as a climate entrepreneur. Or if they do, they might want to, have their head examined. Meaning she's like, I'm working with women who are trying to solve real problems at these levels at a grassroots, and they're not thinking about themselves as quote unquote climate entrepreneurs. They're thinking about themselves as farmer producer organizations, or they're thinking about themselves in energy and renewables, or they're thinking about work they're doing in the circular economy, but they're not identifying as climate entrepreneur in that way. And I know those of us, often with the assets, or those of us deploying or coming up with these programs and ideas, often put fancy monikers on it. My question to the two of you is, are we overcomplicating this issue or using these kind of terms like climate entrepreneur that don't resonate in local markets? And I'll start with Johnny. If you were to say that with the women you work with, what would their reaction be? And how would you describe the work they're doing?
Healthy controversy. Thanks, Rob. And I think that's exactly it. My in-mind response would be exactly the same as hers, is that it's very broad. And it is where money is being pivoted to. So climate entrepreneurs are naming themselves. But the reality is they don't identify as that at this stage. So these are incredible women who are solving community problems at the heart of it. But also context matters, right? So what climate-based solutions means on the continent could be different to how we think about it here. So I think we overcomplicate it, but more than that, I think maybe we're putting too broad, we're looking at it as too broad a brushstroke. So I think it's about education. I think it's about meeting entrepreneurs where they're at, and really trying to understand their perspective from a local relevance, so that we take them on the journey, because I think from an impact perspective, those are the right people. They just don't know it yet.
And so when you work with them, how do you help them navigate the space that they're being asked to draw capital from, right? If we put these restrictions on our capital that has to have this, has to have the right name, the right, the sound, what do you encourage them to do? And can you tell us about some of these climate entrepreneurs who would not self-identify that way, but are doing amazing work at the intersection of gender and climate?
Yeah. So let me answer the first part of the question first, which is at the base level, giving them really sound commercial skills. A lot of these businesses have started from, as so many entrepreneurs do, solving community problems, thinking about how do I come up with an innovative solution that first and foremost solves the problem and then thinks about commercial viability. And so it's about what are the commercial principles, how do you think about growth, how do you think about scale, and also that psychological component, particularly for female founders, which is this deserves to grow and thrive. This is relevant, this is meaningful. So I think that that's definitely the kind of work that we do. And then quite tangibly, it is around what do you need to be thinking about in the realm of sustainability? What do you need to be thinking about in the realm of understanding your capital needs? How could those needs be met? Capital is not the same thing to all people, and the entrepreneurs need to be supported on understanding first and foremost their needs, and then how those needs can be met, and what's possible out there. And then the second part of it is, for me, I guess, myth busting, but promotion, and why I'm so pleased to be here is these women are doing incredible things. And, earlier this week someone said, oh, it's so wonderful that you're in women empowerment. And I said, well, we're actually trying to move away from that term because it feels like, again, another kind of platitude, right? But the reality is that we have got female founders on the continent running, growing, and developing incredible businesses. And I'm talking about the founder who comes out of a rural community and looks at, the wastage of oil and creates a biodiesel solution, innovates, gets her biodiesel labeled and marketed. I'm talking about women who are looking at alternative energy from a completely different perspective. So anyone who knows our challenges, particularly in South Africa and on the continent, is we have energy crises, as is so common around the world. And of course, everyone's looking to renewables. But what founders are doing in our part of the world are they're going, we have an energy crisis, but we also have an access crisis. So they're looking at solutions that are mobile. They're looking at solutions that can provide energy where it's needed, when it's needed. When we're thinking about agriculture, we're taking it in the context of water scarcity. So how do you get innovative around really sustainable water solutions that only use water when you need it, which kind of forces the entrepreneur to think back into the value chain. And I think the last thing I would say is that what many people overlook when they think about climate entrepreneurs is that you've also got the businesses who support the value chain. So those in education, those in engineering businesses who are thinking about sustainable engineering, and those even potentially in industries like mining and manufacturing, which you wouldn't think of traditionally in these contexts, are doing incredible work and delivering and looking to bring to the world incredible products and services.
So Payal, you've been at this for a while, and you know what sometimes in forums like this or in context, we create this little box that we want grantees or potential investees to fit in. You have to have this, none of that, and that. And we say, then you go, can you do that for us and deliver it? How have you seen that play out? How do you approach these challenges? Obviously, we do want to focus on climate and gender, but are we making life too hard sometimes for these women businesses by coming up with our kind of theory of change and then forcing it upon the actual practical realities?
Yeah, I think the short answer is yes, I do. So for the foundation, and Rob is very well familiar with the work that we're focused on at the foundation, which is, of course, to support the growth of gender diverse or women-led businesses across the spectrum of capital. And so we, just for context, we're both engaged in impact investing and grant making to drive our objectives. So on the impact investing side, we're investing in women-led, primarily women-led or diverse funds in emerging markets that are then investing in turn in women-led businesses. Now on the grant side, we're supporting nonprofit organizations ideally diverse nonprofit organizations, so led by diverse leadership, that are in turn providing support in various forms to women-led businesses. So that can be through access to finance, network access, market linkages, what have you. And so that is where we begin in terms of our framework for identifying partnerships. And then we begin to prioritize organizations that are based in those markets, because as we are directly supporting WOMHub as a grantee, but also through the Climate Gender Equity Fund, which is led by USAID and Amazon, we want to meet organizations who have the context and expertise where they're at. And so it's been such a tremendous pleasure working with WOMHub and our other grantees, because they understand the solutions that are needed from the local context perspective. And so, yes, I do think we can overcomplicate things. I think the challenge sometimes that we have as U.S.-based funders is wearing the U.S.-based, the U.S. hat, where our networks are constrained to what we know. And so for us, it's been a very deliberate effort to look outside of that box. And when we assign, when we, as a foundation, we're sector agnostic in the sense that we are intentional about supporting women-led businesses who have potential for growth, but their solutions are varied. We do find that where we are biased are where there are solutions that are impacting women. And so climate, of course, being one of them. But our box is, in terms of scope, it's fairly large. It can be anything from supporting women-led businesses that are focused on agri-tech, that have an agri-tech business, are thinking about renewable energy. The scope is very wide. So ultimately for us, it's about what is the end solution, what is the end goal, is that business viable, and how can we continue to support their growth?
Paul, you mentioned you do both grants and investments. Can you talk a little bit about flexibility there and how you approach? I think you do investment and grants into the same organization sometime, or certainly into the same area or region. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of flexibility with the kinds of capital you can bring to that problem?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are a few instances in which we do make grants and investments into the same organization. Because one of our, not to overuse the term theory of change, but one of our, I guess, goals is to support the entrepreneur across the spectrum of capital. So so to give you an example, we have a grant with Root Capital to support women-led agribusinesses in their growth through technical assistance and training, what have you. But we've also made an investment into the Women in Agriculture Fund, so that those women who are receiving capital from the fund are also receiving that additional support through the grant, the technical assistance that we're providing through the grant. So there's this through line. There's a holistic suite of services, if you will, that is supporting their overall growth. And we don't do that often, but in instances where that is possible, where there's a partner that has both a fund and a TA vehicle, we will explore those options. Because for us, again, it's not just about one piece of service or access to finance. It's about everything that those services encompass to support that business.
So, Paul, I'm going to come back to you with this question as well. So again, we want to hear from you in a few minutes. The second inviting controversy, it was at a impact investing conference a couple years ago, where it was in a breakout session just like this one, and an individual stood up talking about climate investment and said that my organization and others like it have billions of dollars ready to be deployed against climate, including with gender. And when is the nonprofit sector going to get off their butt and do something about building a pipeline that we can invest in? And I thought, wow, okay. I didn't realize it was the nonprofit sector's job to build your commercial pipeline in which you'll be receiving profits from. But thanks for clarifying. So there was no controversy, by the way, in his mind on whose job that was. But I want to ask that because often you hear about this. Oh, if there were only the investments, there's not investable business. And, we have all this money we'd invested. If only that, well, maybe that's your job too. You should be helping build that pipeline of investable businesses if you're sitting on the billions of dollars of capital. So I want to come back to the two of you. Whose job is it to build the pipeline? Is it my friend Anjani's? Is it yours, Piles? Of course, maybe it's everyone's, but talk a little bit about that notion of pipeline building.
Yeah. You want to go?
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, it's everybody's responsibility. Rob and I often talk about the role of corporate foundations, or this perceived idea that we need as grant makers to de-risk investments for investors to come in at a whatever level they want to come in at. And that's the role that, we've sort of just taken on as, in some cases, as grant makers. That's not to say that that should not be our role. We're filling some kind of, void that exists in the market. But it is our collective responsibility. We have a job to do in terms of our grants, in supporting the growth of micro entrepreneurs all the way to high growth businesses, and as investors, work to do to seek out the pipeline. And so one of the things that we've been supporting with 2X is Project Catalyst. I would love, Rob, for you to just talk a little bit about Project Catalyst. But just in summary, is a landscape analysis that Visa Foundation has supported with 2X around the number of funds, women-led funds that exist in the space, to dispel this notion that there are just not enough women-led fund managers or diverse fund managers that exist in the ecosystem. And the same goes for investable businesses, women-led businesses, to dispel these notions that the pipeline simply doesn't exist. Well, you just have to try harder to find them if that's the case. So go out and do the work. And I do think, especially as a capital allocator, we have a job to do to address these misconceptions and help identify potential pipeline. But, everyone has a role.
Anjani, you're often caught in between all this, everyone waiting on the other person to build up. When the DFIs are going to do it, no, it should be the private sector, the corporate foundations, the private foundations. You're caught in that. They're all looking to you.
And I'll start with probably where I wanted to end when you first asked the question, which is the pipeline is there. Just sign the damn check. So, and our partners hear this often from us. But the reality is that, we can have these philosophical arguments around whose responsibility is it, and I 100% echo what Payal said. It's a joint responsibility. But there's a couple of realities we need to face. The one is the pipeline is there. It just may not be in the form that we are ready to accept it into. So then there's a responsibility for entrepreneurial support organizations, funders, et cetera, to go, what does business ready look like for us, and what role are we going to take in developing that? From a WOMHub perspective, we say with pride, but also with sometimes with sadness, that every single program, every opportunity, every possible capital allocation pot we've had is always oversubscribed. So it exists there. The reality is that the filtration and the bottlenecks, unfortunately, are real, which means that there is something that is broken in the chain of what it takes for that capital allocator to see that as viable pipeline. So I think across all of it, we need to kind of really question ourselves. And I'll come back to the thing that I think context matters, right? So when we talk about pipeline, what does that mean? When we say, female founders in this particular sector with this kind of thing, are we really challenging each other around this type of expectation around revenue generation is not realistic, or this expectation for green energy in Southern Africa, at this kind of level of traction? It's just not possible because it doesn't exist yet, So it's really about challenging some of the assumptions we have around what that pipeline looks like, and then kind of then coming together in these great initiatives to say, so rather than admire the problem, what are we going to do about it?
Do you think, you mentioned the rate of return and people's expectation and adapting to the business. Do you think part of the problem at this same conference I was at, I at one point took my name badge off and changed it from Rob at 2X Global to just Rob Mezzanine Capital, because I felt like everyone just introduced themselves, not with their name, but where they show up in the capital stack, which I found really strange. Before they'd even tell you about themselves, they'd say, oh, we do Series A. I'm like, I didn't ask. I thought I was just trying to find out where you're from. So do you think part of the problem is that we also are so stuck in our little piece of that solution? And again, obviously, many allocators are limited to the kinds of capital they can provide, but do you think we've become too rigid in those structures that if it doesn't fit their exact parameters, then it's somebody else's problem? Do we need greater flexibility from the asset allocators?
100%. And I think, and that's why I said, it's not about from a place of judgment, because of course we all have individual responsibilities, but I think that then leads to these unintended consequences around very broad statements around capital allocation and what is possible and what is not, and we almost then trip over ourselves around the impact that we're jointly trying to deliver, right? So yes, I think that there is a space for a little more flexibility and a little bit of agility, but also around meeting the entrepreneurs where they're at, understanding the outcomes that they're looking for, and then going, actually, this is a capital solution that could meet that. Because I think too much of the narrative right now is, there are these billions of dollars that are available, but why is it that such small percentages are filtering through to where they're needed? Let's kind of look at the full kind of value chain and the set of systems that make that up and challenge those along the way.
Yeah, the percentage I think is exactly 2% of the 600 billion going into climate is going to women. So we clearly have a massive, massive market failure in that. So you mentioned, both of you, about being more adaptable, listening to the voices. How do we do more through initiatives like Climate Gender Equity Fund, other work you're doing, to make sure this is all about upsetting this balance of power, shifting the power from the asset holders or the West and into for these women in emerging markets. So beyond just shifting the mechanics of the power, which is important, how do we also increase their share of voice in this conversation? Because I hear you saying often about listening to, having a voice, meeting them where they're at. That is about letting their voice into the room, as opposed to it being regrettably dominated by people that look like me and those voices in the room. So how do we get more of those voices to help shape this conversation?
So I think opportunities and vehicles like CGEF, the Climate Gender Equity Fund, are based on those types of principles. And for me, as a recipient, what stands out is the availability of a grant that gives you the flexibility to make some of those decisions. I speak about local relevance, but that doesn't mean you have to be hyper-local and only provide solutions to entrepreneurs in that particular context where it makes sense. It's just about understanding this is what would work in that market, and we're not sitting in the north assuming that we know the best use of this capital, but rather we're giving you the space to try something, of course hold you accountable for it, but see what's possible. So if you take the way that we're using this particular grant, it is around acceleration of businesses that are almost ready for investment, and taking them through hyper-acceleration around really understanding their capital needs, and more importantly, what does that capital enable for them? And then really quickly being able to actually deploy the capital to them. And it may be smaller numbers because you're walking with them on a journey to be VC ready, or you're walking with them on a growth or scale journey. So what will be interesting is when you're able to deploy that capital as part of the same grant, what does that allow? What does that enable for that business? What does it unlock for them? Get that feedback and then create the cycle of reciprocity, and hopefully then exponentiality of impact, because that's ultimately what we want.
Paul, how do you at Visa Foundation make sure that voice is guiding what you're doing, and also making sure women like that's voices are in forums like this, and how are you enabling that?
Yeah, so for us and for everyone in the room, this is in large, very much to Rob's credit, who led Visa Foundation's strategy for 5 years.
That is not why I asked that question.
But it has to be said, because I think culture matters within an organization, and how you set the tone in recognizing that these power dynamics exist as an asset allocator. That there are these these power imbalances, if you will. And for us, it was very significant that Rob did set that tone very early on in terms of asking our potential partners, what is it that for the next 3 to 5 years, what will support your growth? What do you need from us? How can we be a partner to you, as opposed to our coming to the table saying, well, this is what our expectation is, and this is what we need from you guys, and these are the outputs and outcomes we're expecting over the next 3 years. So almost every conversation that we now have as a foundation starts with, what can we do together? How can we support you all? And that very much is something that is a through line through our fund managers that we invest in and the nonprofit organizations that we support. And in turn, we hope that is also the cadence in terms of the culture that they set with their partners, their businesses, their investees. And so that's a start. And then second is, especially in venues like this, right, where we're bringing together, international audiences representing a diverse set of stakeholders, that on that stage is a fund manager that we're working with and we're partnered with, WOMHub, or an investee, or an NGO partner, because it's having worked, Rob and I, and many of you here, having either currently or having worked at a nonprofit organization, recognize that, there is sometimes is pay to play to be at events like this, and well, we know because we've all paid, but and it's not always accessible to everyone. And so how do we make sure that these are platforms that are accessible to our partners and that there is that voice, that represented voice at the table?
Yeah, well, and I should say, and our compliments to Sorensen. I'm sure many of you have felt the difference since they're taking over of this event and the way that they've incorporated diverse voices into the curriculum, and we're grateful to them because this is one of those sessions. So this was the session that we submitted, and we competed publicly and got the votes online, and we're here. So we're grateful, and they've done a lot of work. So thank you, Jacob and team at Sorensen, for opening up these spaces to folks like Anjani. Let's not hear any more about this Rob guy, please. All right, so I want to turn these questions over to you. We talk about Climate Gender Equity Fund, 2X Global, WOMHub, Visa Foundation, but what's on your mind? Please keep inviting healthy controversy. And I think, are there mics, or is it, or do you have some questions as well on note cards? Yeah, if you could write, or if you as you said, we're going to be casual this last session of the event. So does anyone have a question they want to just use their outside voice and we'll listen in? Yeah. Please, yeah. Got a mic for you here, so yeah.
I'd be curious to actually know who are the ones who care about taking people out of the valley of death, because you have the microfinance on the lower end, and then you have the impact investors on the other end.
Right.
And then the second part, just as a comment, since pipeline was mentioned many times, a lot of indigenous people have taken offense to the word pipeline and have suggested a better word, waterways. So it's a suggestion.
What's the better word?
Waterways.
Waterways. Okay, that is a better word. All right. Thank you. We will change that. All right. So yes. So where have you seen this? That we talk about that valley of death for the small business between microfinance and venture capital. I think they're called banks, by the way, if I'm not mistaken, which are not filling that hole. But anyway, that's a big topic. What kind of organizations are you seeing help people get through to that investment ready?
Yes, I mean, that is the simple answer, but they're not meeting the need.
Only it was so easy.
If only it was that simple. But the reality is more around what's the challenge that is being faced in understanding the full picture, is that whilst many people or many organizations are saying they're putting together solutions that are entrepreneur-focused, entrepreneur-built, or entrepreneur-serving, the reality is that from a credit and risk perspective, you're really, kind of up against the same criteria, which means you're getting spat out, and that's a lot of the frustration. So kind of before you even get into the system, I think we need to acknowledge that and go, are they really entrepreneur-friendly or built for the entrepreneur at heart? But then what we're starting to see is definitely earlier stage debt. I think is where we would serve entrepreneurs best, because they need to understand how it is they articulate the possible returns for their business when they reach a growth stage, and then they're looking for innovative financing at that stage, which meets their needs. And I do sound a bit like a stuck record because it is around what are their needs at the moment. But if we're more in touch with their needs and we're able to support where they're at right now, I will honestly put my money on the fact that we will see the expected financial returns in the future because we've supported them in the right way.
Yeah. Paul, I'll let you add anything. So at the Climate Gender Equity Fund, that's exactly the sort of space we're trying to work in. We're providing working capital to emerging fund managers who have yet to reach their first close. We're providing them capital to do track record investments at the ticket sizes that's in their models, so that they can demonstrate that before they've got their first investor on board. And then with the businesses themselves, we're trying to fill that gap. Too big for microfinance, maybe too small for commercial investment. It's one of the things we're doing. But Pyle, any other players?
No.
Next question, we've got a mic here. Waterways and social entrepreneur. Is that what was the, you said not climate entrepreneur, what was the social activist? Is that?
No, they are.
Yeah, social activist, yeah. That's a much cooler name anyway. And if you could, let us know who you are too when you're asking your question. Cheers.
Okay, sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Marlene. I'm with Serona Asset Management, proud member of 2X.
Yep.
I was in Nairobi a few weeks back. Amazing summit. And my question is around private capital and how we can get better flow of private capital into women and climate. And I wonder if perhaps better data and better presentation of data will help capital flow into women and women in climate. Because at the 2X conference, one of the things I learned is that women are disproportionately affected by climate change, but are also part of the solution, more so than investing in men. But I also learned that, for example, when you talk about debt, that women tend to be better at paying back their loans. So I wonder if those types of data pieces and putting that together and being able to present that in a better way in the private markets will help capital flows. And I wonder what your take on that is.
Yeah. Thoughts on that one?
Yes, and yes. So much of what you've said is so important because we still seem to lean towards the fact that it feels like a good thing to do. And the reality is, of course it is. It's the right thing to do, but it also makes great commercial sense. And when you look at the numbers, they don't lie. And it's to your point around the data points. And I think there are times still where we're a bit too esoteric when we talk about this field. And actually, when you start looking at the core data points, even at a level down in granularity from what you're speaking about, in terms of what are the returns that are being articulated but received, right, from women-led and women-founded businesses. The fact that when you invest in women-led businesses, you're right, they repay their money, but they are also able to utilize capital in really interesting and meaningful ways. So we need to start getting very real about those data points, and then talk in commercial terms, because that's the common language, right? So I think that we have to get more specific around that. And then when we educate and when we have these kinds of conversations, be real that gender isn't around women. Gender is around creating a level playing field. So what we're trying to do is make sure the starting line is the same for everyone, right? And so this is not around gender bashing or anything like that. It's about saying, it's the right thing to do. We don't have the level of diversity that we should have, both at the investment table and from an investee perspective. So we've got to kind of change the nature of the conversation, and I think data will go a long way in solving that. And I think it's then up to us to really elevate the stories of who's doing this and what are they able to do from an entrepreneur perspective. The likes of our partners such as Visa Foundation, Amazon, kind of going, well, we invested in this and this is what we saw, are going to be some of those stories that need to be elevated to get us there. And what I want to add is just the concept of social activism. That is an absolute reality for female founders, but it then talks to disproportionality, but it also, more importantly, talks to the commercial aspect. Because what we need to focus and why the capital discussion is so important alongside the social activism is the more money you make, the more impact you can have, right? And women, particularly on the continent, self-exclude from that because culturally, socioeconomically, you're not supposed to kind of own that, right? And so we've got to change that and go, it's the right thing to do. You know, capital is something that you want. The reason why early stage founders don't actively pursue VC in many cases is because they feel their business is being taken away from them. So we've got to change those dynamics. We've got to explain to them that making money makes sense because it allows you to do more. And that's ultimately the impact that they're looking to deliver, and really why we're all doing the work we do as well.
So, Paul, you've been trying to convince people of this for a long time to invest more in women and girls, even some of your nonprofit work and working with young women. What do you find does sway the argument? Is it data? Is it the storytelling of, a track record over time? Like, how can you unlock more of this with skeptical holders of those assets?
I mean, it's all of the above, and completely echo everything that Anjani shared. I think also, what we haven't discussed is investor bias that does exist in the ecosystem. And we supported Village Capital and WeFi a couple of years ago in research around the investor bias that does exist within the ecosystem and the challenges then women fund managers, diverse fund managers experience in receiving capital. And it's not insignificant. And so they developed a toolkit around addressing that bias. And, if we're looking at the same qualifications, return profiles, et cetera, of a team, the only difference being who the teams are led by. More often than not, it's the all-male, white teams that tend to win in terms of the investment. And so there's also this significant challenge around investor bias that we're continually trying to talk about and hammer on, which is it exists, recognize it, and do something about it.
Next question. Everyone, any more? Raise your hand. Oh, okay. Should we? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, there's no shortage of data showing that women are the right investment. That is absolutely the case. Other questions, topics that you have? Thank you.
Hi, my name's Laura. I'm a founder of a product company called SEEP. We do eco-cleaning. And I was at an event yesterday supported by Cartier, who are one of the sponsors. And those stats, I've never heard them quite as clear. So women produce 30% higher IRR, 2.5 times more revenue per dollar invested, and are more likely to exit. So I'd never heard it that clearly. My question was sort of beyond female-focused funds, but sort of general funds, and it's a question to LPs really. Are there any targets that are set to say at least 50% of your deal flow or your outbound, your initial meetings have to be with female founders? Like, what's the role, I guess, of LPs in all of this?
Yeah, I mean, thoughts on that, because often we sort of just have the scorecard that is about the dollars, but your process also has to be equitable. And I saw one of our 2X members at Criterion here, and really focuses on that issue of power dynamics in the process, not just in the outcome, but who's at the table, what conversations are you having, how are they being conducted. So thoughts on that, on making sure it's not just the outcome you're measuring, but how we got here. And you're not going to get to those female founders if you're not interviewing a robust percentage.
Well, I was just going to turn it back to you to speak a little bit about 2X criteria. So this is what we prescribe to within the foundation in terms of how we diligence potential partners, investees, and grantees. We prescribe to 2X criteria as a set of standards that our potential partners need to meet before, honestly, we even begin a conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, no, just quickly on that, and this is all available via our website and so forth, but if you're not familiar with the 2X Global manages the 2X criteria, which is a rigorous set of criteria to be used in your investment process, but it looks well beyond just the makeup of ownership or board member employee, but also supply chain, the product benefits, governance, so across the board, and quite rigorous. I think the current implementation guide pushes 90 pages, so you can download that before your flight home. But it really is trying to move past this, like, oh, that's a gender investment because it went to a female founder, or there's 50% women on the board, or something like that. So it's a really robust set of criteria that came out of the Development Finance Institution's commitment to the 2X Challenge back in 2018, and we've continued to manage that. And you may be familiar with 2X in the form of 2X Collaborative or the Gender Smart community. Those two communities came together about 2 years ago to become 2X Global. So that's who we are. I'm happy to talk more about that afterward. Let me ask one more question, because this pathway to entrepreneurship is one of the things that we're trying to do at the Climate Gender Equity Fund. And here's the last healthy controversy question. Are accelerators overrated? So let me add a little context to that. Meaning, I think we often think the only pathway, or we've sort of fallen into the habit of the only pathway being toward entrepreneurship, is acceleration, incubation, the sort of Silicon Valley model, shall we say. And in your app, there is some research we've attached from Endeavor Insights that did a really fascinating study between Mumbai and Nairobi. Nairobi being this sort of development-led acceleration hub, and Mumbai being dominated by Infosys, among other companies, and looking at the rate of successful startups and exits out of those two markets, and was making the argument that maybe we should be doing more to put women in skills-based employment in technical firms, in climate firms, in energy companies. From there, they will launch their businesses, as opposed to our very convenient model of run them through 18 weeks or 16 weeks of training, and they pop out an entrepreneur on the other side. So, Anjani, do you, and I know at WomHub you do focus on job placement for women, not just entrepreneurship, but job placement as a pathway to entrepreneurship. Because even, think about, yes, there are the entrepreneurs that drop out of Stanford D School and go on to JIA, but that's really not the main story we're looking for. And I know, Pyle, you do the same, focused on, with things like EFOD and other partners, on how you train up young women to enter the workforce so that they can go on to run their business in the future. So do we underestimate the importance of employment and a skilled-based employment in this entrepreneur path?
Yeah, and I think, we talk quite glibly around the ecosystem approach, but that really is what it is, because if you kind of think of it broadly as talent waterway development, it is that right at the outset we should be offering women the opportunity to decide where they go. Because some of them will naturally move into entrepreneurship, some of them need to be developed to go into entrepreneurship, but some of them may be employed by the incredible entrepreneurs, right? So there's a number of elements around this, and if we fundamentally want to transform the landscape of what it is we're trying to do from an impact perspective and a long-term sustainability perspective, it then makes sense to kind of put all the pieces together. And rightfully so, from a WomHub perspective, we have verticals around, talent waterway development, I'm taking it with me, entrepreneurship, incubation and acceleration, and also, interestingly, venture building, right? Because the other reality is we can say, well, we're looking for, 15 green hydrogen businesses on the continent. They're just not there, right? So what role are we playing in venture building? And then of course capital, right? So we've got to, I think it's an ecosystem answer.
Yeah, Pyle, thoughts on this and programs you've managed that are focused on that entrepreneur, but maybe 5 or 6 years before they become that entrepreneur. What do we need to do more of for employment?
Yeah, so one of our key indicators that we track are our jobs created and are sustained through the enterprise, because jobs growth is of significant importance, not just for the business's success, but also for the individual's success. And so for us, we do think about, you referenced the EFOD program, which is in supporting young people's employment within the agriculture sector across sub-Saharan Africa. And so, so absolutely agree with everything that you shared, Anjani. But in addition to that, if we think about entrepreneurs that we may know personally and their journey in terms of getting to where they are, it's, at least I don't know of very many that come right out of college, start a business, and then it just takes off. It certainly happens in Silicon Valley, but oftentimes leadership is, it's learned and through experience. And so starting within an organization, learning those critical skills, and then launching a business is something that oftentimes our investees, when they're looking at co-founders, will look at in terms of their level of experience, their growth, how they got to where they are, as sort of a determinant of the potential success of that business. So I think that is of critical importance.
Next question. I'm going to hand over kind of by the sound table. And I think I got the basic facts right in that Endeavor Insights report, but check it out and let me know. But it's well worth your time. It's a couple years old by now, but I think it made a really important distinction that we don't pay enough attention to. Please.
Hi, I'm with Mars Discovery District, and we actually run an accelerator, and a women in clean tech accelerator, and have for about 6 years now. And we're a little different, maybe not an 18-week model. In fact, it's a 2-year model. And one of the things that we found that has been really transformative in terms of growing an ecosystem of women-led clean tech companies, entrepreneurs, founders, has been the role that we've played in encouraging women in those roles, often in the lab, kind of going, no, actually, your idea is a really good one. And there's something there. And we've found over the years that encouragement is actually quite important and necessary. And then after the 2 years are done, one of the feedback, the most important piece of feedback that we've received that we have been able to act on is that the power of community within an accelerator has been absolutely transformative for these women. So it's hard to be an entrepreneur. It's a lonely road. It's really hard to be a woman clean tech entrepreneur. It can be particularly lonely. It's intensive. It's a lot of emotional work in a lot of ways, right? You're dealing with some really pressing issues, and you have a life and a family often that you're taking care of. So that power of community becomes particularly important and an asset. And I'm curious if you've experienced that, or if you have comments on that as well.
Yeah, Johnny, please.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was really thrilled to see that one of the topics here was around trauma. Because the reality is that the focus that's required on entrepreneur as person when supporting women-led businesses can't be underestimated. And it's what you're referring to. We call it the power of the tribe, because many of these entrepreneurs have a lonely journey, and we all know entrepreneurship is a lonely journey, but it's even lonelier when you're trying to carry this thing as well as a disproportionate burden of care in every other aspect of your life, and that's just the reality that many of these women carry. So they end up coming to this space, be it virtual or physical, being able to kind of develop a tribe that's kind of got your back, and that can challenge you and support you on your journey. And the other reality is, that women carry a lot of other costs, emotional and financial resource intense, that they carry on behalf of family, community, whatever that looks like, that they don't talk about. And that means that they often can't talk about the reality of their businesses. So that's another reason why the tribe becomes so important, because one, you can't talk about it because if you're even vaguely successful, everybody wants a piece of that pie, and actually you're trying to understand this is not revenue, this is not cash. Or there's an assumption that because you're an entrepreneur, you're making all these millions, and the business model's 100% right. And so, again, what piece of that pie can I have? So absolutely, that power of community is so important. But there's two things also. So trauma, absolutely, we don't realize the kind of trauma that women entrepreneurs are bringing into the space as they think about starting and developing their businesses. And I think that spectrum is really wide. And then, as I referenced earlier, is the psychology, particularly the psychology around money. And many women, because of the way in which they've been brought up, the contexts in which, their cultural norms or whatever that is, have kind of dictated how they think about things, influences how they think about money, how they think about capital, how they think about growth. And so I think as accelerators, as an ESO in whatever format, we have to make sure that we focus on that entrepreneur at the core of the business. And actually, at the end of the day, the investor's backing the jockey at this stage, right? So we've got to get that right.
Paul, anything you want to add there?
I mean, I can't follow that. No.
It is so. We'll let you go first next time. Any other questions? We've got a few more minutes to go. Yeah, please.
I think I'm still formulating my question, so it might be a little discombobulated. But my name is Nick, and I work with an organization called Kula Project, and we work with smallholding coffee farmers in Rwanda specifically. And so the demographic we work with is still in poverty, and our focus is agriculture training and access to finance and business development to help them get out of poverty. But I guess my question in this conversation is, with a demographic like ours, that is, the majority of people in sub-Saharan Africa, majority of farmers especially, is there space for investment capital to go to that type of person, or is it realistically, we are a nonprofit organization, and so at this point we are grant funded, and is that kind of, realistically what is necessary for the demographic that we're working with, people that we're working with, to ultimately get them to a level that they can have when you talk about SMEs, for them, if they earn $1,000 in a year, it's a life transformation. We're not at that level of being investable to most people. Is it kind of realistically that the kind of work that we're doing has to be the work of grant funding to get people to a level that is then SME investable? Or is there a different way that organizations like us can be thinking about, working with some of our clients to be investable? Or is it like we're talking about two different segments of the work in the big picture?
Yeah, Paul, why don't we start with you, since you've done, grant making at that level, done a lot of work with smallholder farmers and farmer producer organizations. Does it require an aggregation point, to reach a certain scale where that can flip into a PRI or an investment, or what do you think is needed in that case?
So our model is typically with the intervention point is typically at the aggregator or the farmer producer level, to begin with, diversifying the board, linking them to markets, and ensuring that then they are able to bring value to the smallholders that are within, that are shareholders in the producer organization, and or in the supply chain of the aggregator. And so for us, that's sort of where we begin. And at the aggregator or FPO level, what is the type of capital that they're receiving as an investment that will support their growth, and then in turn the smallholder farmers' growth. In some instances, in the instance I gave earlier with Root Capital, our support is into the Women in Agriculture Fund, which is directly providing debt capital to smallholder farmers within the fund that are women-led primarily. And so it is absolutely possible for that type of capital to reach the smallholder. I think it depends on what that capital structure looks like, and the size of the farmer, the what are they producing, all of those factors have a role to play. But yeah, I that's how I'd say, yeah.
Yeah. And also, I think we just have to also recognize as a sector, there are some problems that can't be solved with venture, right? Or, I remember the former CEO of Mercy Corps, and I ran into Britt the other day here saying that I've yet to see the shared value model that can solve for the Central African Republic. He was always fond of saying, so there is still an absolute role for philanthropy, and the return needs to be a human return, as the reminder that these are human beings. And so, yeah, I think sometimes we fall in love with, sort of market-based solutions when the reality on the ground just isn't ready for that. Well, maybe in the last minute or two we have. Oh, one more question back. Oh, please.
So my name is Amit Bhatnagar, and actually we have developed like complete lab in a box and lab on a bike, which can deliver primary healthcare facility, primary healthcare right at the doorstep, and with our skilling program by empowering the rural youth and rural ladies. So my question is, like, maybe in South Africa, like if we take out this model where we want to really set up a skilling facility, train the rural ladies and then really empower them with this primary care facility which can work on solar panel in remote areas, delivering the care on the ground. How do we really engage with the government? Because this model cannot be sustainable by itself, but we still are able to bring deep sustainability hope by bringing everything on a bike and in a very cost-effective manner. But still there is a component of, grant funding is still available, needed, but still bringing a sustainability aspect with a addition of grant funding so that real care can be established on the ground. How do you really engage with the government on that front? And second question is, sometimes you need some policy level change. For example, the skilling program we have designed, it is not 2 years, it's only 6 months. But getting a recognition for such a program, how should we approach to the government for that?
Oh, right, the government, the other part of the ecosystem. I think we often, maybe in contexts like this, underestimate their importance in the system. So you must have some experience with that, working with government at a national or a regional level and trying to implement programs. Yeah. What have you found successful in that way?
So I think the good news is that it's changing. I think governments, particularly in our region, are understanding that that is another power dynamic that needs to change. So we're certainly seeing a shift, albeit slow turning wheels around being willing to engage and going, if we're all trying to solve the problem and you've had 30 years to do it and we're not there yet, this may be another solution. So that's changing, and I think it's becoming easier. Certainly with recent changes, both from a regulatory and a face of government perspective in South Africa specifically, it's going to get easier. I think the environment is more entrepreneurial friendly. So right now it's about making sure that you're talking to the right department, because that's unfortunately the bureaucracy of governments, right? But I think there is absolutely now an intention to say, if you're trying to change, which is the problem you're trying to solve, right? So, for example, if we take that, let's make sure we talk to the source of where that impact is going to be felt, be it energy, be it health, whatever, rather than small business development, and getting those role players together. The other interesting thing about the region in South Africa specifically is that we've got to follow the shifts that are coming. And so with G20 coming to South Africa next year, there's a whole lot of things that come along with that. And it's up to us as organizations to decide, what do we see as the opportunities in there? What do we see as the potential leads? Because those are going to be, and not so much the G20 leaders, but certainly the support portfolio committees, et cetera, are going to be where some of these conversations are going to be had. So how do we tap into local partners in those contexts, or your local partners coming to South Africa to make sure that the conversation is being placed in the right way? And I think it's about collaboration and partnership because, as you said, we've got experience with this, then how do you take it further?
Yeah, and one other place to lend your voice is to the new collective quantifiable goal. I think I've got that right, the NCQG, which is now entering into discussion. One of the other roles at 2X Global that we've done is submit a white paper into that moderated discussion to try to get gender mainstreamed into the new COP commitments. And so now you're talking about dollars in the trillions. So there's the government work at the local level, but there's also these big multinational commitments that are happening where right now gender is not called out in those climate commitments. And so we're advocating, and please, to the degree you can, help to champion that being included in the new COP commitments. I know we only have just a minute left, but yeah, please quickly up front here. Why don't you? Maybe this is not a good idea to hand you this one. Let's see. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, this is going to be an easy one. So I'm Lisa Hansen, managing partner of Built Clean Ventures, and we work at the intersection of climate, gender, and built environment in Southeast Asia. And one of the things I notice is that the funders that we speak with all the time, they know the data as well, the data that this audience has been able to shout out. And so I have a few key stories that are close to my heart that I will often bring up to share. And I figured that I could extract a couple of stories from both of you to, hear about on the ground, the intersection of climate and gender. what has mobilized you to, move in this direction, or a favorite story that you like to share to help people understand what we're talking about?
Well, thank you. That is a great way to end. Beforehand, I'll let you two think of your story. And just if you are interested, you got it ready? Yeah. You're ready. Yeah. So if you are interested in learning more about the Climate Gender Equity Fund, as we mentioned, USAID, Amazon came together, Visa Foundation, Skoll Foundation, Reckitt's, and UPS Foundation. But this fund is expected to go at least for the next 3 years. And if you are an asset allocator and want to join this donor consortium, by the way, if you think about that list of names, it's a pretty eclectic set of groups to come together, and which is part of the fund. And we're deploying these grants around the world to emerging fund managers and into organizations like Womb Hub. And so we'd love to work with you, or if you are in that space, so please let us know. And our next round of application opportunity will be opening here in the next 6 months or so. So just see me afterward, or Carrie and Mariah are here from Chemonics as well. So, all right, your stories to close us out, and then we'll hand it back over. So, Paul, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So one is our investment in Arua Capital, which is led by an exceptional woman named Adesua, and based in sub-Saharan Africa. And she invested in turn in a woman-led business that is developing solar-powered refrigerators, particularly for rural communities in fish farming and in fish farming areas that need to refrigerate their foods before they sell it to the market. So during power outages, these communities are at a significant loss. Their stock completely goes to waste, not just the fish, but everything else that they're selling with their product. And so developed a solution to address that significant gap in the market, and has been tremendously successful in various communities across the region. I have stats, but I just can't remember them. So,
and I think that's the point, that the stats are known. What people want to start hearing about is the stories behind the stats, and that's where we're going to win. So two top of mind for me, actually quite similar. The first is we didn't realize we had an incredible founder who started a business around chicken incubation. And we were like, okay, I don't understand why you'd want to incubate chickens. But the reality of that market is, first of all, sustainable chicken farming is a challenge. It's the most cost-effective and easily accessible form of meat to the population. But there's an extremely high mortality rate of young chickens, similar to the fish story, because of conditions. Access to power, access to refrigeration, etc. So she developed these mobile incubation units and became incredibly successful. And when we talk about success, yes, absolutely, the financial success is one thing, but it's also around, and I always talk about what does it enable, right? It was that her solution was able to be replicated across four countries in the next year. And whilst this may not be a big deal for people sitting in this room, but it enabled her first flight to the UK to sell her solution. And we underestimate that, and I said it the other night, is, when I was coming through and I said to the founders, I'm going to be going to San Francisco, are there any messages you'd like me to share? And they said, we wish we could go with you. And I felt quite disingenuous saying, I'm taking you with me, which is true, because I meant your story, but actually, they are who we should be hearing from, right? So how do we give them access into rooms like this? And so that may seem like a small thing to us, but for her to go to the Royal Academy of Engineering and speak about her innovation and then get investment at that conference in the UK was incredible, an incredible opportunity. So we mustn't underestimate things like that. And the second, and I love telling the story, and I'm sorry, Robin Pyle, I think it's the second or third time you're hearing this, is our recycling founder, Matsubishi. And we ran a circular economy incubator funded by a Scandinavian funder. And of course, recycling is second nature to them. And we were thrilled that this lady had been making so much progress into recycling in her community. But when she completed her pitch, and we were actually in the So there's a grant associated with the program that they pitch for. And when we were in the judging section, they were completely perplexed as to why part of her business model was to pay waste collectors. Because recycling should be about impact, and recycling should be about the right thing to do, you know. We went through a process of helping them understand that in this particular context, when you barely have food security, when you don't have access to clean water or energy, you've got to create another demand, which is economic activity, by paying waste collectors for them to enable your business success. And I think the minute they understood that what she was doing was she was creating reciprocity in her, she was actually creating a value chain, right? It was the most incredible story, and she's been able to grow through winning that grant in the end, exponentially in what are underserved and overlooked markets for recycling, because the way that that's kind of dealt with in our types of regions is that's kind of a first world problem that we'll never get to in those types of regions. So for me, that's a really incredible story that she's been able to grow and also being true to the markets that she serves.